Hello, and welcome to another episode of You, Me, and Ennui. I'm your host, Mary Kate Polanin, and today we're talking about the role that your personality type can play in the workplace. And today's guest is Michael Segovia. We're very excited to have Michael on to speak with us. He is the principal consultant at the Myers-Briggs company and designs and facilitates the company's in-person and virtual certification programs, as well as bespoke learning and development training, working with clients in entertainment, technology, financial, healthcare, education, and across countless other industries. His career at the Myers-Briggs company has spanned more than 32 years, and he has facilitated workshops across the world. Michael has also presented a TEDx talk on how personality type theory has impacted his life. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Mary Kate. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, we're really excited to just dive right in because we're big fans of the Myers-Briggs, the MBTI, as some people know it. Personally, I've never really taken the MBTI or the Myers-Briggs test, so I don't really know my personality type, but I am very fascinated in understanding who you are and how that contributes to how you show up in all areas, including the workplace. So we're really excited to have you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So why don't we start with if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became interested or involved in personality work at Myers-Briggs.
When I joined the Myers-Briggs company, now it's been actually 36 years ago, I also didn't know a whole lot about the assessment. My background is in clinical psychology. And so when I was introduced to this assessment, there was some learning that I needed to basically undergo. And I would describe the whole experience with the term planned happenstance. There's a professor at Stanford University who I used to play tennis with all those years ago. That was his theory. His name was John Krumboltz. And it's just sort of something that I fell into. However, the more I started learning about preferences, the more I started learning about my own preferences and those of others, the more I realized how impactful this information can be in people's lives. The idea for me growing up feeling really, really different, the Myers-Briggs really helped me understand those differences and really appreciate and honor those differences to basically the person I am now. All these years later, they've basically flown by.
Yeah, I was recently rewatching your TED Talk, and I was really struck by how, the different types of personalities or your personal connection with feeling different really informed a lot of the work that you do. And for anyone who's not familiar with your story, I mean, your TED Talk is fabulous, and we'll
Oh,
link to
thanks.
it. But if there's any a short example or a brief example or an anecdote that you'd like to share from it to help people understand like your personality and personality work for the listeners, that would be great.
Sure. In that TEDx talk, I talked a lot about how growing up, I just felt very different in my own family, very different in culture and work in general, and that there was a lot of pain being in that state. And so, finding a place with an assessment like the Myers-Briggs helped me go from that pain to this place of joy where I really learned to appreciate and honor myself. And then it's helped me over the years understand and appreciate and honor other people. In that TEDx talk, I talked a little bit about my middle school band director who made this huge impact on my life, who pulled me aside one day and basically said to me in so many words, "You're different. However, it's okay because you work hard, you try hard at everything you do, and as long as you keep doing that, you're going to be okay in life." And that was a really powerful message that this person instilled in me that I remember now all these years later.
That's beautiful. So, and I love that you had someone in your life like the band director who could identify that for
Mhm.
you. It sounds like the Myers-Briggs type indicator is, it's a different version of that sort of assessment.
Ah.
But for anyone who's not familiar with MBTI, can you explain it to them?
Sure. The Myers-Briggs type indicator was developed a long time ago by a mother-daughter team, Catherine Cook Briggs and Isabel Briggs Myers. It has been, of course, revised and researched quite extensively a lot over the last many, many years, almost the last century. And the goal of the MBTI assessment is really about helping us gain some understanding around how do we take in information and how do we make decisions in four preference pairs, if you will. So extroversion and introversion, that's one preference pair that looks at how do we get our energy, where people who prefer extroversion get their energy from the outer world of action and people and things. And people who prefer introversion get their energy from the inner world of ideas and sort of that inner reflection that they get. Then once we have taken in that information, once we look at that energy, we then get to how do we take in information? And we do that two ways. When we take in information or perceive, we do that using sensing, which is taking in information in a very step-by-step sequential way versus taking in information in a more big picture theoretical way, if you will. Now, it's important as I talk about these preference pairs, I've talked about extroversion and introversion and sensing and intuition so far. We all do both, we just prefer one over the other. So
Mm.
once we've taken in information, we then go to making decisions or coming to judgments. And we do that using thinking, which is coming to judgments or making decisions using objective logic, focusing on the task at hand, versus versus making decisions based on how those decisions will impact other people or how they relate to our values. We call that feeling. So it's thinking versus feeling. And then
Hmm.
finally, how do we organize our external world using judging, which is about coming to closure, or perceiving, which is about keeping our options open. And again, with the MBTI, it's trying to sort or identify which side we prefer. It's not telling us how much we prefer or how little we prefer. It's just about understanding that we all prefer one over the other. And of course, we all use both of these preference pairs.
Well, thank you. That's a really helpful
Oh,
explanation.
good.
And so we kind of touched on your personal connection to personality work, but switching gears since the season on Yumi and Ennui is all about the workplace and our professional lives. This is your job, but for someone who doesn't necessarily work in personality types all day, every day,
Mhm.
how can having a better understanding of your personality and the personalities of others help you succeed in the workplace?
Your question takes me back several years ago where I was then a brand manager at the Myers-Briggs company. We were then called Consulting Psychologist Press, and a new person joined, and she was managing different brands. However, she and I had to work together very closely. And I'll tell you, to be completely honest, at first, we just didn't get each other. In fact, I would say we probably didn't even like each other. She liked to have meetings with me pretty much every day where we would go over all of these details for about 2 hours. And I remember after the third or fourth meeting, I just thought, it's too much detail, too much time. I need some of my own reflection time as well. And so after maybe the fifth meeting, 10 minutes into it, I said to her, all right, okay, that's enough. I gotta go. And I practically ran out of the room. Well, she called me and said, that was actually really rude. And it was. And so I went back into her office and I said, we're really different. And so what we decided to do was take a look at our Myers-Briggs type indicator differences. Her preferences were ISFJ, mine are INFP. And so the differences there were really with sensing and intuition. She liked detail, I like big picture information, and judging and perceiving. She liked to come to closure with her decisions. Perceiving, I like to keep my options open and to continue to explore new ideas. And so what we decided to do was negotiate. Then maybe we didn't need to have 2 hour meetings every day, maybe a 2 hour meeting at the end of the week. And then that sort of let her flex a little bit. And I flexed by giving her the details that she needed moving forward. As a
Hmm.
result of that flexing, she and I actually we started pretty much enemies to becoming best friends, the person that I relied on the most and the person she relied on the most moving forward. So, a challenge to anybody listening, anybody watching, maybe tomorrow seek out that person who traditionally really annoys you. And instead of walking away from them, walk up to them and see what you can learn from their differences.
I love that anecdote. And here's where I normally would share like a personal example of mine, but it's
Mhm.
an on running joke this season, especially, is that I can't really talk about it because my boss is listening. But
Ah,
it does sound it's great to hear you talk about how you found how your own personality and the personalities of others you've learned to, like you said, flex and also understand and compromise. And we've definitely had some versions of that in our own like staff retreats where we talk about our working styles. So that's great to hear a success story. Um, and so you're talking about this workplace relationship.
mhm.
Sometimes they start rocky and then they can become the most fruitful ones that you have. But what would you say are the top three elements of a healthy workplace relationship?
With the situation I shared and in situations in general, I think trust is a big part of it because if there wasn't trust, it would be hard for us to even consider flexing to what the other person needs. So trust I would include there. I would include appreciating our differences and honoring and
Mm,
rewarding those differences. And so you mentioned the word I did as well. Flexing. Flexing is about honoring first and foremost who we are and then learning how to flex to the other side when it's appropriate. And when we
mm.
appreciate our differences, we can learn to do that. And then maybe the third is about incorporating those differences into how we then take in information and how we make decisions. So that let's say I'm in a meeting and that person who I've learned about differences isn't there, and I'm asked to give a point of view or to make a decision to take into account what would that person add to my decision now so that I'm
Mm.
incorporating that instead of just relying on what I know, learn from what other people can teach me.
I love that.
Yeah.
That sounds like it really helps you show up as like a better team player,
Mhm.
and not just your own personal agenda being moved forward. I love that.
Yeah, very much
Um,
so.
so how has your understanding of Myers-Briggs changed over the course of your career?
I started from a clinical perspective all those years ago. I was
Mhm,
25 years old. I'm 62 now. So clinical assessments that I learned about in graduate school basically told us there was a right and wrong, there was a pass and fail. And so for people
mhm.
who aren't really certified on the MBTI, that's often how they will try to apply it. And that's actually not how it should be applied. It's why we say everybody should get certified on this assessment. People who are educationally qualified, like I was at a graduate school, would look at an assessment like the Myers-Briggs and assume it was like all of those other assessments out there, when in fact, what the MBTI is trying to do is sort which side you prefer. And that's all it's really trying to do, recognizing, of course, we all use both. So what I'm trying to get across is the MBTI is not a trait-based tool that tells you how much of something you have, which is how I came out of graduate school learning about assessments. Instead, it's more of a type tool which sorts one side over the other.
Interesting. So yeah, I guess looking at it from I guess we'll say the pedestrian
Yeah,
observer like myself. But I guess so what you're saying is that, the test it's like you said, it's an indicator. It's not meant to be some sort of cut and dry. This is the way you will always function in making decisions. It's
yeah.
just simply it indicates where your preferences, like where you tend to go.
Yeah, an indicator, so much so that we actually don't even call it a test or exam because test or
Okay.
exam implies pass or fail, good or bad. So we would
Right.
call it an assessment, or I know the Myers family would always refer to it as the indicator, which is one
Mm,
indication of what your preferences might be. A good one,
mhm.
however, a true feedback session around the Myers-Briggs type indicator. I just delivered a one-to-one session about a half an hour ago, a 90-minute session with someone. The true process is the person first takes the assessment with the mindset of answering the items how you prefer, as if you have nothing and no one to answer to. So what we're trying to do is get you away from the roles that you play in work and in life and at home in any way, and just answer
Mhm.
how you prefer. So once a person does that, then they would work with me or someone who's certified like me to walk them through understanding what do we mean by the word preferences, and then a description of each of the preference pairs where that person would first hypothesize, or we say, what's your self-estimated type for each of the preference pairs. Once they do that, then I bring out how they answered the assessments on the report, the Myers-Briggs type indicator, how they answered the assessments on the assessment itself. Let me rephrase that, how they answered the questions on the assessment itself. And then you put that together. You look at their self-estimated type, their reported type, that's how they answered the questions, to help them get to best fit type. So that in the
Hmm.
end, it's not a test that says, here, this is you. It's a
Yeah.
process that the respondent gets to decide what ultimately fits them.
I think that's such a human tendency to want someone to tell us, like,
You
here,
bet.
this is who you are, and this is what you need to do moving forward,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I have a cold, and so the human tendency is I want to take that pill to cure that cold. Well, the same goes with life. We want that magic pill to tell us
Mm.
everything, and there's no such thing, of course.
Yeah. And you touched on something else that as we were going over the topic of MBTI and personality type, something that came up in a staff meeting, and I brought this up, is I'm always curious about, this idea of self-reporting, but also with the understanding that there might be certain like cultural or societal expectations that we have either internalized or have been socialized to have.
Oh, so
I'll
true.
use an example for myself. I'm a woman, and so there are
Mhm.
certain expectations for me to be helpful, et cetera. And so I'm always curious about, does Myers-Briggs, can it help you break out of the expectation, or is it helpful? Does it help shine or maybe show a mirror if you get the result and say, actually, that's not really who I feel like inside, but that's how I thought I should answer. Have you
Yeah.
come across that phenomenon in your work?
Yeah, and what you're getting at for me is the importance of mindset because we want you to try to remove those expectations, knowing that it's impossible to do that completely. However,
Mhm.
the more you can, the more reliable and the more valid your assessment results will be on this on the Myers-Briggs. Now, you brought up the idea for me around thinking and feeling and cultural expectations. I would say pretty much around the world, definitely in the United States, where there's this expectation for men to make decisions using thinking and for women to make decisions using feeling. And when they don't, we get these inappropriate labels that I won't, of course, mention. I won't give them any power by mentioning them. There are different cultural expectations around the world. And so when we continue to do research with this assessment, we have to take that into account. We do know when it comes to percentages of types, they look pretty similar around the world. What will look different is how that preference is expressed based on what that culture expects or encourages and what it discourages. For example, extroversion in the US looks very different from extroversion in Finland based on what
Really
those cultures experience. And yet there are very similar percentages in both of those cultures for E and I.
interesting. Yeah. Now I'm curious about what extroversion in the United States tends to look like. But that's really interesting to think about. So I guess I'm also curious, can your MBTI ever change over time?
You know, it goes back to, excuse me, the idea of mindset. If your mindset when you take this assessment is to remove those roles and expectations and answer how you prefer, you likely will not get different results. Now, the theory is we describe these as inborn predispositions.
Mm.
And if those inborn predispositions are encouraged, then they typically will stay with us throughout our life. However, we know there are times we haven't been encouraged to be the people who we are. And so then we might sit down and answer an assessment like the Myers-Briggs with the mindset of who should I be versus who I am. You could get different results. For example, when I first took the MBTI a lifetime ago, I took it with the mindset of I'm gonna be a new employee someday. What should I be? And I answered very differently than who I truly am. If you're able to answer truly who you are when it comes to your preferences, you won't get different results. My preferences, by the way, in case you're
Yeah.
curious, I'm very open about them, are INFP, introversion, intuition, feeling, and perceiving. And so sometimes people might say, wait, you prefer introversion and for your job, you talk to people as a principal consultant? That's a
Yeah.
big misunderstanding about E and I. Extroversion and introversion is about where we get our energy. It's not about are we shy or can we talk? Do we talk a lot? It's more about where do we get our energy. And every person who I know who prefers introversion, if you get us interested in a topic and you get us to talk about that topic, it's hard to get us to shut up to talk about that topic. For me, I love talking about the Myers-Briggs type indicator. I love talking about March Madness. Final Four is coming up this weekend. It's in Cleveland. And, well, for the women's teams, and I was almost there. I went last year, and I almost got to go this year, but things fell through. But yeah, I love talking about women's basketball. My favorite team, Stanford, and they didn't make it, but maybe next year. We'll see.
I love that. Yeah, it's so interesting. I have heard that before about the perception around introverted and extroverted, but I've also like personally can relate to being a very social person, but when it comes to recharging, I definitely need my alone time,
Hmm.
my downtime. My fiance
Yeah.
is the complete opposite.
Oh, really?
He's very outgoing, very social, but like when he wants to relax, he will continue to like stay out and see other people. And I'm like, I
Huh.
don't know how you do it, but if that's what gives you energy, great. I'm gonna stay home and watch Bravo. It'll be great.
Is that how you manage it?
Um,
That you decide that he gets to do that? You could do what you want to do? Is that how you manage
yeah.
it, or are there other things you've come up with?
Well, yeah, for the most part, yeah, I would say like if I need some alone time, I'm very
Mhm.
comfortable relaxing at home. And like I think in the beginning, I used to think like, oh, well, he's out and like what does that mean? But I've come to understand like we have our own personal time together, one-on-one. Also, I don't
Sure.
know if this is an introvert thing, but one-on-one time for me.
Hmm.
This is veering more into maybe the love languages, but like
Sure.
quality time is really
Yeah.
up there for me.
Mhm.
And so if I get my quality time and then he wants his recharge time, like that is a great balance for us. That's what works for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And that's what any relationship is, finding that balance where both people in the relationship get what they need from that relationship. People who prefer extroversion tend to have this breadth of interests, and they tend to call not everyone, but they call a number of people their friends, versus people who prefer introversion more of a depth of interests. And we tend to be more intimate in that we might call some people our friends, but only maybe a couple of people, not many more than that. And that's fine. Now, where it can backfire is where that person who prefers extroversion really always needs that time and doesn't really flex, or the person who prefers introversion always needs their own introverted time and they don't flex. There's where issues can come up.
well, that's where I give, the Catholic Church a shout out for pre-Cana conversations because
Yeah,
we really have been able to have that communication. So
yeah.
uh going back to job search and career, is it possible for someone to use their assessment and understanding their MBTI type to enhance their job search or their career development?
We have a lot of data that shows certain types are attracted to certain careers. Now, that's really just a starting point because it just tells us about attraction to careers. It doesn't tell us how well you're going to do that job or that career. It doesn't give us information about skill. However, it's a good starting point. I would recommend, though, people who are in the sort of stage of career planning and development to also think about maybe adding something like the strong interest inventory or the super strong assessment, which looks at vocational interests as well, so that you can look at who you are. There's your MBTI type. What you want to do. There's your vocational interest side. Putting it together, working with a career counselor. There are great career counselors out there who use both the Myers-Briggs and the strong. We have a platform, VitaNavis.com, if people are interested in looking at that. That's a way to explore your career interests more fully. That recently is including the Myers-Briggs and an online self-estimate component to it as well. VitaNavis.com for people who are interested.
I love that. Yeah, I'm sure I can think of a few college seniors who might enjoy
Mhm. Yeah.
utilizing some of those resources. I mean, this is kind of a joke question, but if you have any insights, I wonder, what is the standard MBTI for like, say, a podcaster?
A
You talk
podcaster.
about being attracted to certain career
Sure.
paths that just made me wonder.
It's interesting because you'll see all kinds of things on the internet where you'll find Marvel characters in their MBTI type, Star Wars characters in
Mm.
their MBTI type. What I don't like about those are they're not based on any research. What I do like on those examples are you'll see every type represented. And that's what you're going to find with podcasters. You're going to find in any career, every type will be represented. It's just certain types will be overrepresented and certain types will be underrepresented. And I would say when it comes to podcasting, it would have to do with the kind of podcast that you're doing, where we might see some overrepresentation and underrepresentation.
Interesting. So maybe something like an in-depth conversation like this one would be a very different personality type than say
Could
just
be.
like a chat podcast catching up on, pop culture, things like
Yeah,
that.
very much so. You might find some EI differences there. You might even find some judging perceiving differences there. And I would say differences within the other two preference pairs as well.
So in your line of work, have you run into any skeptics or what would you say to someone who might be skeptical of MBTI?
The Myers-Briggs is the most widely known, most widely used assessment in the world. And so as a result, it can also sometimes be the most misunderstood, where you'll find people who will say things like, well, people get different results all the time. What those people are citing is really, really old data, and they don't even know that they're citing old data from the 1970s, a form of the MBTI that's really, really old. There are much more recent versions of the assessment that are based on representative samples around the US and around the world that have very good reliability, very good validity. By the way, reliability, consistency, and response. And there's good data there when it comes to test, retest, and internal consistency reliability. Validity is, does the assessment do what we say it does? And we have some really good data there as well. So typically skeptics are people who haven't really read the manual. They don't even know a manual exists. Maybe they're not certified on the MBTI. Maybe they haven't been to our website to see all the research and white papers we have on our website to really show how valuable this assessment can be. By the way, our website, themyersbriggs.com, for people who want to take a look at that.
Great. Sounds like there's a wealth of resources there as
So
well.
much
So
data. We have a research division that is just fantastic. They take care of the MBTI as well as our other assessments that we publish.
it's great. Well, so again, going back to this idea of like how MBTI can kind of inform our work.
Mhm.
And you mentioned a bit of a not a career transition, but maybe a perspective shift that you experienced
Mhm.
by working with MBTI. But have you ever seen examples of a successful career transition based on someone taking stock of their MBTI and saying, okay, like this
Yeah.
is actually where I need to be, or I'm feeling like this is the right next step for me.
Sure. I have lots that come to mind. One that stands out is several years ago, I was working with a construction manager at a major theme park. And that theme park was going through some layoffs, and the person next to him was going to be laid off. This construction manager said instead, you know what? Why don't you lay me off instead? And everybody who worked with him said, but we love you. You're great at your job. He said, yeah, however, I really want to explore what else is out there for me. And so part of his package was to work with someone like me, where he took the Myers-Briggs and the Strong and the FIRO-B, which looks at the FIRO-B looks at your interpersonal needs in the areas of inclusion,
Uh-huh.
control, and affection. So this guy took the MBTI, and his preferences were ENFP, and his strong general occupational theme code was social and artistic. Not what you would expect from someone who does construction management. And so
Right.
I even started to doubt. I looked at these results and thought, well, maybe his mindset wasn't there. However, as we were walking through his results, he said, yeah, that's me. That's me. And we were seeing things on his strong show up around education, elementary education. And so I started to explore that with him, and he said it's what he's actually always wanted to do. However, he was never encouraged when he was young to do that. He was told, this is what you're supposed to do. In our
Right.
society, in our culture, construction manager is what he chose, and he was really good at it. He
Hmm.
actually, part of his package was some education, so he went back to school, elementary education, and is now an elementary school teacher. I ran into him like a couple of years after he finished his schooling. It was at some random event, and he walked up to me and he said, "You're that guy." And I said, "What guy?" And he said, "You worked with me." I said, "I do remember working with you." And he said, "My only regret is that I didn't get to work with you when I was younger." And so that's
Mm,
really a message for anyone young listening. Find a counselor who will really help you find what you want to do, not what other people think you should do. Because this guy felt like his regret was he spent all those years doing something that he was good at, but he didn't really like. And he could have
yeah.
really been happier all those years if he had had something like this happen to him earlier.
Wow. What a great example. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Oh, that's so wonderful that he's happy doing what he's doing now.
Yeah.
I can
Great
imagine him
guy,
as a great teacher.
making a wonderful difference, of a
Yeah.
fantastic example in his community, without a doubt.
I love that. That touches on my next question around this idea of workplace fit.
Mhm.
And how your MBTI can contribute to overall job satisfaction and performance. And it sounds like from your previous example, sometimes it's not as binary. Like you can be a good workplace fit and
Sure.
perform well, but not be satisfied overall. Um, you know, societal expectations aside, or I guess pressure to get the perfect job aside, how can your MBTI type, lead you to where you think you will be the right workplace fit and be satisfied in your job that you do well?
Sure. I think a lot of that is understanding first and foremost who you are,
Hmm.
and then finding a work environment that honors that, that appreciates that. That's why I've been with the Myers-Briggs company. You said over 32 years, it's now over 36 years. I'm at a company that really honors and appreciates who I am and doesn't expect me to be something that I'm not. Sure, I'm challenged to flex. However, first and foremost, I'm in an organization that honors who I am. I work in I do work with every industry, and I will tell you, I'll walk in and I'll ask, so what types are encouraged here? And people will share examples and they will be different from their own type. And so I'll ask people, so how are you doing? And they'll say, I'm really struggling because that
Hmm.
company I'm working for just doesn't appreciate who I am. I remember working with, and I can't name the company, of course, it was a very large automotive company. And it was very much about sensing, thinking, and judging, about order, structure, rule making, following those rules. And I remember the CEO said, we need some diversity on this team. And so they interviewed many people. They looked for somebody who was very different. Of course, they did not use the MBTI as part of that process. That would be inappropriate. However, they found someone really different. And so then I went to work with that person individually and I asked him, how's it going? And he said to me, not well. I don't think I'm going to last very long here. And I said, why? And he said, because they wanted somebody really different to bring in a whole new flavor to the organization. That's what they said they wanted, but that's not really what they wanted. And I'm not going to last very long. By the way, his MBTI type happened to be ENFP, so very different from that STJ culture. So it's really difficult sometimes. We want to work, of course. However, try to find organizations that honor who you are. I've been offered positions at other companies, and as I looked at those other companies, I realized I don't think I'm going to be honored like I am at the company I work for that really honors me the way I need to be honored and rewarded.
So interesting. So I mean, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I just have to ask because something that you mentioned sparked some curiosity. How it wouldn't be appropriate to dig into someone's MBTI type. Can you expand on that a little bit? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so not appropriate for selection. Excuse me. So it's why I would not recommend putting your MBTI type on your resume. That's not
Oh,
information I would include on your resume because people would see that and not really know what the MBTI is about and then make all these assumptions about what you can
form
and
their own
cannot do.
conclusions. Hmm.
Yeah, same goes with using the MBTI for selection, not appropriate. The items are rather transparent. You know what they're asking you for the most part. And so if you see the job, you might try to answer it according to that job instead of who you really are. You're not going to get real results anyway if you're that organization. The MBTI is not about skill, it's about preferences. And I know people who are really good at operating outside of their preferences because they have the motivation to do that. For example, I have a colleague who has preferences for intuition, feeling, and perceiving, and yet does very detailed work, sensing, thinking, and judging work, and does it great. She's amazing and loves what she does. And when I ask her more about how are you able to flex, she says, I don't really see it as flexing. I see it as making sure you have everything you need so that when you get there, you're going to be happy with what I've done and you're going to like me for the work that I've done. She does great work. So what I like to say is any type can do any job, any career, as long as there's that motivation to do that job or career.
What an interesting clarification. I love that. Well, this has been such a great conversation. And, we usually end it with uh,
Hmm.
the nod to our title, Yumi and Ennui, knowing that we're speaking to folks who are maybe feeling like they're in a transitional phase,
Hmm.
trying to decide the next step, but maybe are feeling a bit stuck. And the idea is to get unstuck. But we always like to ask our guests, is there anything giving you a sense of ennui right now?
That's a good question. And maybe even, I don't know if the word scary is right for somebody with preferences for INFP who we introvert feeling, which basically means we make decisions based on this inner value system that guides us and drives us. So when I think of where I might not be happy in the world or in life, I'm generally a happy person. I guess what I'm sort of dealing with is the divisiveness of our country right now, and that if people understood differences more fully, maybe we wouldn't be in this situation where we are so divisive. It's really why Isabel Briggs Myers wrote the first paper pencil items of the assessment way back in the early 1940s. We were a world at war, and her thinking was if people understood differences, maybe we wouldn't be in the situation in the first place. So, we have big elections coming up, and I just really hope people will be more kind to each other, more open to
Mm,
each other's viewpoints, and really thinking about how do we protect the rights of everyone and not think about taking away those rights. So deep for somebody who introverts feeling, it's where we typically go. It's really who
mhm.
we are at our core.
Well, amen to all of what you just said. So thank you for sharing and thank you for being so open and vulnerable in your response. And also, this whole conversation has been really enlightening for me, and I hope for our listeners at home. So thank you again, Michael. This has been such a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been nice being here. And who knows, maybe we'll get to do this again sometime.